Hello, 8th graders. Thanks again for coming and joining me today for another lesson. Today's lesson is going to be a little bit different. We are going to review operations with integers. Now, integers are not necessarily an 8th grade topic, but it's something that is so fundamental to you guys understanding to help with that foundation that we are building. With the content getting more difficult and challenging, we can't have you still confused on integers and having that be the challenging part for you. So today we're going to do a very brief but quick and thorough review of operations with integers. When we say operations, we are talking about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. With addition, remember that this addition can also be a positive sign, because positive and addition is the same thing. Just like in the stock market. When something is positive 2.3%, that means it has gone up. That stock has gone up by 2.3%. So it's gone up, it's increased, it's positive, it's addition. We also have the subtraction sign, which is the same as negative. In the stock market, when something is at negative 0.5%, that means it's gone down. It has decreased. You've subtracted the value. We have multiplication, and for this, we will mostly be using parentheses. Sometimes we'll use that dot to represent multiplication, but we'll never really use that X. And then last but not least, with division, we will usually use fractions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that is what we mean when we are talking about operations. And when we are talking about integers, we are talking about positive and negative numbers. So operations with integers is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing positive and negative numbers. So when we're going to start this, we want to first look at negative numbers. And what are the negative numbers? We have negative numbers every day in our life. And now I'm sure you are very familiar with negative numbers, but it's important to be able to visualize real-world applications to negative numbers. And so when we're talking about negative numbers, we can talk about temperature. And these are below zero temperatures. If we are talking about Celsius, that means freezing temperatures, okay? We can also use negative numbers when we're talking about elevation. This is below sea level. Okay, below sea level, meaning it's lower than the level of the sea. We can also use negatives to represent money, and that's not a good thing. That means we are in debt or we owe money. Negative numbers are used, like I said before, in the stock market to represent when stocks drop, a decrease. Negative numbers are even used in YouTube. Those are those down votes when people put the thumbs down or even leave negative comments, bad comments. We can even use it for direction when we're talking about latitude and longitude. Degrees, negative degrees. When we are looking at negatives, it's usually something that is either an empty space or it's missing something. There are artists who even do this, where they use the empty space around them to create a picture. By making the picture black and filling in that negative space, a picture arises, okay? So that is an example of empty space, missing negatives. Now, these can all be translated to positive numbers, but we've been working with positive numbers our entire life. So with temperature, that's above 0. With elevation, it's above sea level. When you have positive money, that means you have that amount of money. So we're not going to review positive numbers so much. My next slide is going to help us visualize and conceptualize negative numbers in the real world. When we're talking about numbers, numbers are abstract, and they're abstract until we put a concrete meaning to them. So for the example, number 3. Number 3 in our heads is an abstract concept until we go along and we make 1, 2, 3. Now that value is no longer abstract. We have concrete meaning to that number. So we're going to look at a few examples right now to put concrete meaning to positive and negative numbers. This is just to help us get a little bit of a better understanding. So this is a hot air balloon. And hot air balloons work simply by using a balloon and hot air. Okay? What they do is they light a fire, and that heats up the air inside the balloon. And hot air rises because it's less dense than cold air. So if you've ever been in a room and you've stood on a bed or a sofa and you felt the ceiling, the hot air, it's much hotter up at the top of the room. Or if you've been on a bunk bed before, it's much hotter at the top of the room because hot air rises. And so that's how this works, is they puff hot air into this balloon and it rises the balloon up. But we also have these things like sandbags to keep it on the ground when they're not trying to raise the balloon up. So we're going to pretend that these are numbers. And our hot air balloon is going to represent any number that we're starting with. Okay? Here we have a sandbag. And this sandbag, as we said, is used to weigh the balloon down. So to keep it from floating away, we have sandbags to keep the heaviness to weigh it down. And we can view the sandbag in this scenario as the negative number. And then we have puffs of hot air. And a puff of hot air makes the balloon go up. And if we're relating this to numbers, we can look at the puff of hot air as our positive number. Okay? Again, this is just to help you visualize adding and subtracting with positive and negative numbers. So let's look here. A puff of hot air, we said, represents a positive number. So when we have a positive number, that's a puff of hot air. And when we have a sandbag, that's our negative number. So if we see a negative number, we're going to consider it a sandbag. Our first number is where we're going to be starting. So I'm actually going to erase this air balloon because it's not where I want it right now. And we're going to look at this expression right here. So here we're going to start at 8. Now you could view it as 8 meters up in the air. Our hot air balloon is here at 8. And we are going to add, we have the number -3. We said a negative represents a sandbag. So we're going to add 3 sandbags. So what is that going to do? Is it going to make my balloon lighter or heavier? it's going to make it heavier. So it's going to bring that balloon down. It's going to weigh it down. So it's going to move it down 1, 2, 3, and now my balloon is going to be at, we'll just draw that here, 5 meters up. So that is what it looks like when we're adding that negative, we're adding that sandbag. It is pulling my balloon down. We can do another one, and we can say, all right, -6 plus 8. Now, I know that this doesn't really make sense to say at -6 when we're talking about elevation unless we're talking about below sea level. So maybe there's a big hole in the earth or something. We can forgive that right now. So we're going to start at -6. And we're going to add, and so this is a +8. We're going to add 8 puffs of air. A positive number is puff of air. 8 puffs of air, of hot air. So is that going to make my hot air balloon move up or down if I'm adding more hot air? It's going to move it up. So it's going to move it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we are now going to be at the level 2. Okay, so that's pretty basic stuff. But what if I am at -6 again, and I take away -4? So here I'm starting at -6, and I'm taking away -4. -4 represents a negative number, so 4 sandbags. So picture this right now. We're at -6, and we're taking away, we're getting rid of, we're dropping 4 sandbags. Is that going to make my air balloon lighter or heavier if I'm getting rid of 4 sandbags? It's going to take weight away, so it's going to make it lighter. So it's going to actually move it up 4. And the reason I wanted to point this out is because this is that infamous taking away a negative. And how taking away a negative actually means we're moving up because we're taking away that weight. This is just one way I wanted to get you to start visualizing positive and negative numbers. We're going to move on to the second way. And this is with digging holes. All right. We're going to look at positive numbers being dirt and negative numbers being a hole. So when I'm at -9, that means I have a hole that is 9 feet deep or 9 meters, whatever you want. I am missing 9 feet of dirt. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 feet of dirt. So I'm going to add 3 feet of dirt in this hole. I still have a hole, so it's still negative, it's still missing, but my hole is no longer 9 feet deep. It is only 6 feet deep now because I added 3 feet of dirt. So -9 plus 3 is -6. Let's look at -9 minus 3. So here I have a hole that's 9 feet deep. And now I'm taking away 3. That means I'm digging even more from my hole and digging out 3 more feet of dirt. What this shows me is now my hole is not just 9 feet or 3 feet deep. It is 12 feet deep. So I'm digging out more dirt. What I want you to do is to pay attention to what we do next. -8 minus a -4. And we're going to talk about this because, again, that minus and negative is very important. Okay? I'm not saying you have to visualize dirt every time you do subtraction or addition with integers, but it's going to help Maybe memorizing the rules or singing the song, same sign, keep and add, different signs, subtract, whatever. Maybe that works for you. And that, if it does, great. You can continue doing that. But it doesn't work for everybody and it's not consistent. That's just memorization. This is being able to understand the concept, and so you won't ever make that mistake again. So let's take a look at why is minus a negative the same as plus. Okay, so if I went to college and I needed to take out a student loan, so let's write this. If I owe $10,000 because I got a loan for $10,000 for college, that means I have negative $10,000. All right? My question to you is, how do I get rid, subtract or lose, get rid of my debt? How do I get rid of my debt? Well, by paying my money, by paying. That means by adding money. So I want you to look at get rid means subtract. Debt is negative. So to get rid of my negative, I need to add. So getting rid of that missing money is by adding money. Another example we can use is there's a hole in the road. Okay? So if I have a hole in the road, the pothole that is going to pop my tire, how do I get rid of a hole? How do we get rid of a hole? How do we fix a hole? By filling it with dirt or cement. By adding dirt. Again, get rid is minus, subtract. How do we subtract? And a hole has that missing space. That's negative. So again, in this situation, getting rid of a hole or getting rid of a negative is the same as adding. So let's look at our example down here of -8 minus a -4. This means I have a hole that's 8 feet deep. Okay? And now I want to get rid of 4 feet of that hole. How do I get rid of 4 feet of that hole? Sorry, that's ugly. By filling in 4 feet. I still have a hole, but my hole now is only 4 feet deep. So ladies and gentlemen, when we see that negative, one way to make it easier on ourselves is to change it to a positive. So this really means -8 plus 4. It's filling in that empty space. All right? It's taking out 4 feet of that hole. Okay? It's filling in that hole. Taking out part of the hole means we fill it in. So, sure, that's digging holes, etc. Again, I don't expect you to constantly visualize digging holes, but there is something you can do, and that's with a number line. Now, number lines can go this way. Number lines can also go this way. And I like to visualize a number line, and I use my hands. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I know my number line's not super even, but you get the idea. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to visualize a number line. And I suggest you practice with your hand gestures, okay? I suggest using hand gestures. It's going to make your life so much easier if you do. And the more you practice with your hands, the more it will just become innate. It will become natural. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the example, -15 plus 8. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with both of our hands at 0. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to attempt drawing a hand. Okay, so both hands at 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move one hand to the first number. Leave the other hand at 0. So for example here, we have -15. So I'm going to take my beautiful hand, I'm going to just copy and paste it because it's that beautiful. Okay, and then I'm going to draw my other hand down to where I think -15 would be, down there. So in my head, I'm imagining this is at 0 and this is all the way at -15, okay? Then what I'm going to do is move my hand again based on the plus or minus. So for example, in this case, it's +8. So I'm going to move my hand up 8. So here I have my hand again. And then this hand is going to move. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but that's okay. This hand is going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up 8 from 15. So again, we have this is at 0 still. This is where your -15 was, and you moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. The reason I want you doing this is because it's practicing visualizing the number line. I know that -15 plus 8 then is not -23. I can see that it's still below 0, so it's still going to be negative, but I moved it up 8, so it's definitely going to be less than -15, well, greater than -15 because it's going up, it's getting closer to 0. So then I can do the math and, okay, well, 15 minus 8 is 7. Oh, it's -7 because it's still below 0. So that's what I want you to practice. Let's look at a few right here. So if I were to look at -6 minus 2, I'd have both my hands at 0, and I'm going to drop my right hand down to -6. I'm visualizing -6 on the number line. And -2 means I'm going down 2 more. So I know it's not -4. My answer is actually going to be -8 because I was down at -6 and I went down 2 more. So this is a really good way of practicing, okay? Because again, you might feel like you look silly. You might feel like, oh, it's unnecessary. But this is practicing actually moving up and down, positive, negative, because that's necessary. Rather than memorizing rules and singing a song every single time, this is going to help you. We have negative 4 plus 9. So on that invisible number line, you start at 0. You go to negative 4, and you would move your hand up 9. Hold on, let me draw that correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you know that it's not negative 13. You are above 0. It's positive, and that's going to help you visualize, oh, it's 5. So take a couple minutes to do this practice, please. I'd like you to do it right now on your own. Pause this video and do these 6 problems. We'll go through them in a minute together, but please pause the video and do these 6 problems. Let's look at 4 minus 6. Hopefully you paused the video and you tried these on your own first. If not, that's your decision. That's your choice for your learning, but hopefully you did. So we start at 4 and we go down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that gives me negative 2. And I'm going to go to number 3 next. We start at negative 2. We go down 12. That means we're going to continue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means I'm actually going to be at negative 14. We're at negative 7. And we're adding 11s. We're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's going to bring me to 0. 8, 9, 10, 11. So now I am at positive 4. Here I have 8 minus a negative 8. This is not 0. If you said 0, that is incorrect. 8 minus 8 is 0. But 8 minus a negative 8 means we're taking away a negative 8, taking away 8 empty spaces. And if I'm taking away an empty space, that means I'm filling it in. So this turns into a plus, and it's actually 8 plus 8, which is 16. Here I have, actually we'll just leave this color, again, minus a negative. That means I'm filling it in. So now I have negative 15 plus 7. So if I am here at negative 15 and I add 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that means I'm still beneath 0, but I'm at negative 8. Last but not least, negative 6, and we're going to subtract 12 more, so that means I'm going down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means I'm at negative 18. So hopefully that helps you start to visualize and at least just review adding and subtracting with negative numbers, because we're not going to be going through that again here in 8th grade. This is your one-time chance to practice. Hopefully you use my beautiful hand method that I was able to draw for you to help you visualize adding and subtracting. When we move on to multiplying and dividing negative numbers, this is a little bit more difficult to explain the conceptualization of multiplying and dividing. It's a lot easier just to remember the rules in this case, okay? But it's so important that you recognize multiplying and dividing rules only work for multiplying and dividing. Addition and subtraction are completely different. And so one way I like to show students how to multiply and divide with integers is by using MathMan. MathMan is someone you can draw with 2 negative signs for the eyes and a positive sign for the nose. And how we use MathMan is this. We look at the signs of your numbers first. So if I am doing an example of negative 4 times 3, I have a negative and a positive. So I look at the signs of my numbers first, a negative and a positive. Next, what we do is we cover up the signs on MathMan. So usually I would use my hands, but I'll use this highlighter. So I know 4 is negative, so I'm going to cover up the negative with my hand. 3 is positive, so I'm going to cover up the positive. And ladies and gentlemen, the sign left uncovered is the sign of your answer. So I said I had a -4, so I covered negative. +3, I covered the positive. What's left, what's not covered, is my negative. So that is the sign of my answer. Then I'll do the math. And then, so I know it's negative, and 4 times 3 is 12. Let's practice a couple more times. If I have a -8 times a -2, I have a negative times a negative. So I cover up a negative and I cover up the other negative. What I have left is positive and positive, so I don't need to put that positive sign there, but I can. 8 times 2 is 16. It works with division as well. 16 divided by -4. So here I have a positive 16, so I cover up that positive. I have a -4, I cover up the negative. I'm left with a negative. And 16 divided by 4 is -4. All right, now, of course, this doesn't work with positive numbers, but that's because, only positive, because you already know that a positive times a positive is always going to be a positive. If I said 3 times 4, you wouldn't think twice about, oh, should that be negative or positive? If I said 16 divided by 4, again, you wouldn't think twice about, oh, is that positive or negative? So positive does not get included in MathMan because it doesn't need to be thought about. That's been something you've been doing forever. Another thing you can think about when you're talking about addition or multiplication and division with negative signs is, so we'll draw that little line. If the signs with two numbers, right? The signs are the same, either negative, negative, positive, positive, my answer will be positive. So a negative times a negative is a positive. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. A positive times a positive is a positive. Positive divided by a positive is a positive. So if my signs are the same, my answer is going to be positive. If the signs are different, and remember, this is only working with two numbers at a time, your answer will be negative. So that is a positive and a negative. Positive times a negative, negative times a positive, positive divided by a negative, negative divided by a positive. So we can look at that right here, which is just what we had said. If these are multiplication and these are division, you can either draw MathMan, you can have it memorized, or you can think of what I just told you. So we have a negative and a positive, so that's going to equal a negative. We have a positive and a negative, so that's going to equal a negative. We have a negative and a negative, so that's going to equal a positive. And we have a positive and a positive. Remember, positive, positive is always positive. These ones you don't need to use MathMan on, the positive. Or we have a negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. We have a positive divided by a negative, which is a negative. We have a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive. And a positive divided by a positive is always that positive as well. Lastly, before we move on, before we finish, I want to show you division as a fraction. A fraction is division, and maybe you never knew this, but believe it or not, the division symbol, ladies and gentlemen, is the template of a fraction. you have your fraction bar with your numerator and denominator. So that's what a division symbol is. A division symbol is a fraction. And this fraction bar reads as divided by. That's what that fraction bar means. So when I have 4/3, this actually means 4 divided by 3. And now, since 4 divided by 3 is a decimal, we're just going to leave it as a fraction. But if I have 24/3, that reads as 24 divided by 3. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is 8. Even if I have a negative, negative 24 divided by 6 is a negative divided by a positive, which is a negative 4. Or even if it's 24 divided by negative 4, I have a positive divided by a negative, and that gives me a negative. Okay, so that's what we can think of. And one thing I want to show you is with fractions. It's very important to know. You could see a fraction written out like this, negative 1 in the numerator, negative 4 in the denominator. You could have the negative outside of the fraction completely. You could have a negative 1 over a negative 4, or you could have a positive 1/4. So let's look at these individually. We have negative 1 over 4. This means negative 1 divided by 4. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. So negative 1 over 4 is the same as negative 0.25. Here I have 1 divided by a negative 4. Positive divided by a negative is also a negative, and 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. So whether that negative sign is in the numerator or in the denominator, we still get the same answer. When it's outside of the fraction completely, this means the whole fraction is negative. So what this means is it's like a negative and then 1 divided by 4. Order of operations says to do what's in the parentheses first, which is 1 divided by 4, which is 0.25. And then you have the negative. So it's negative 0.25. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to notice that you have 3 fractions that are the same. Let's look what happens when we move to this one. This is negative 1 divided by negative 4. Negative divided by a negative is actually a positive. And 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. Uh-oh, this one is a positive. That's different than the other 3. And again, we also have a positive 1 divided by a positive 4, which is 0.25, also a positive. These 2 fractions are the same. These 3 fractions are the same. Notice that when you have a negative sign outside of the fraction, it only refers to one of the numbers, either the numerator or the denominator. A common mistake is that people will see a fraction written like this, and they will think it means negative 1 over negative 4. But this couldn't be more inaccurate, because a negative over a negative actually means it's a positive. A negative on the outside means the fraction is negative. My answer is negative, not both numbers. So you can either say, okay, well, the 1 is negative or the 4 is negative. But it is never, ever, ever both negative 1 and negative 4 if there is a negative outside the fraction. For the last part of this lesson, I'd like you to try multiplication and division problems on your own. I will go through them in 1 minute, but I would like you to please pause the video and try these on your own. You may either use MathMan or whatever rules you know in your head for, that's a very ugly MathMan, I'm sorry, for multiplication and division. So please pause the video now and try it on your own. Okay, let's go through these. Hopefully you paused the video and you tried it on your own. So let's do the signs first and the math second. Here I have a negative times a positive, which is a negative. 10 times 6 is 60. I have a negative times a negative, which is a positive. 14 times 2 is 28. I have a positive times a positive, so that's easy, a positive 32. I have a negative divided by a negative, which is going to give me a positive answer. 21 divided by 7 is 3. Here in my fraction, 80 is positive, so I have a positive divided by a negative, which is going to give me a negative, and 80 divided by 8 is 10. And last but not least, I have a negative divided by a negative, so my answer will be positive. 32 divided by 4 is 8. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a nice review of fractions as division, of multiplying and dividing, adding and subtracting with positive and negative numbers. I hope you were able to visualize and just refresh your brain. If you need anything else, please make sure to reach out to me, and have such a wonderful day.